Steve Reed, hello.
Good to be here.
Very glad to have you on the new Statesman podcast. Tell us about your announcement today. What are you announcing?
We are announcing an allocation of £7 billion going to the 6 established mayors running mayoral combined authorities that they can now use to start building social and affordable homes. That £7 billion is part of a bigger package, which is the single biggest investment any government's made in social and affordable housing in over a generation. It's desperately needed. I know from my own caseload that I get family after family coming to see me. They've been on the waiting list for a council home for years and they can't get one because too many were sold off without new ones being built to replace them. So there's a desperate shortage. So this government is taking the steps to fix that problem, and this allocation of funding to the mayors will allow them to use the money, understanding their local areas, local communities, and start getting those homes built.
We'll delve into the specifics of the mayors, what they can do and how this funding is going to change that. But if we talk in slightly broader terms, I think it's worth being specific actually. In your view, why doesn't the UK have enough council homes? What's happened?
Well, it got sold off under, I still look back on it now. The Thatcher government was a disaster for this country in many respects. But one of them was they were selling off council housing. And I fully agree with the people's aspiration and rights to aspire to own their own home, but they didn't replace them. So the amount of council housing dwindled and dwindled. So now we have a desperate shortage of the most affordable form of housing, and the whole housing market doesn't work if you don't have enough in each category to meet the needs that people have. So over the last 14 years of the most recent Conservative government, the number of people sleeping rough on the streets doubled. You see them, people shivering in shop doorways, sleeping under bridges in tents, in parks now as well. That doubled. Less visibly, but very, very damagingly, the number of families in so-called temporary accommodation also doubled. What's called temporary accommodation isn't that temporary. You're not supposed to be in it for more than 13 weeks. But the housing crisis is so bad now that you're getting families put in temporary accommodation for years, kids sharing the same bed, parents sleeping on the sofa, a single ring cooker in the same room as where you're sleeping, and that has a very damaging effect on a kid's development, their ability to learn at school, their ability to get a decent night's sleep without being interrupted. Where do you do your homework if you're living in a single room? So it is incredibly damaging to families, and yet it doubled under the previous government because they stood back and did nothing about it.
So how are you going to fix it then? Build more council housing?
Well, the Build Baby Build slogan is for a reason. You know, it's a catchy slogan. It's a bit of fun with the hats, but it's got an incredibly serious message underneath it, which is that if we don't build the homes that people in this country need, then we're going to keep experiencing a housing crisis, which means people sleeping in shop doorways, people sleeping under bridges, children living in so-called temporary accommodation in a single room for years on end, but also younger people who want to get out into the world, leave their parents' home. They can't because they can't afford somewhere that they can afford to rent, leave alone to buy. You know, people are living with their parents into their mid-late 30s now, routinely. That wasn't the case when I was younger. You know, when I was younger, I could afford to buy a flat. In my early 30s, that dream of home ownership is closed off to younger people today. So we need the homes that people can afford to live in. We've got the highest housing costs in Europe as a proportion of people's earnings because the homes aren't available. So we have to build to solve the housing crisis at every level.
Yeah, looking at the statistics for young men, 50 years ago, the most common living arrangement for a man in his 30s was with his spouse.
Right.
And now it's with his parents. And it touches on so many various issues, whether it's sort of, you know, you could go from the birth rate through to mental health to personal fitness. It touches all of these issues. People talk about the housing theory of everything, don't they? And its capacity to unlock all of these different things.
I think it also fuels a breakdown of trust in politics.
Yes.
Because particularly if you're a younger we talk about the generational divide. If you're a younger person growing up and you can never see yourself getting on the housing ladder, you can't see yourself aspiring to what your parents had, that's inverted the dream where the next generation would do better. You feel that your generation is doing worse. And what does that make you feel about a system that has allowed that to happen? You're not going to trust that system. And I think it is part of what's causing and driving a breakdown in trust and confidence in democracy. And we see politics moving to the extremes. We see democracy itself in danger in advanced democracies around the world. Now, this is one of the things that drives it.
Yeah, I think that point about sort of apathy is a really pertinent one.
I think it's a bit different to apathy.
Go on.
Because I think it's that people are furious about this. That's not an apathetic feeling. It's a very strong emotion. I cannot get somewhere I can afford to live. I can't move out of my parents' home. I'm never going to own a home in the way that they did. There's fury there, which isn't apathy, but there's no belief that the system can fix it. And I think it's that. It's a loss of confidence in the system. So what we have to do as a government is open those doors that have been closed to people to aspire to more in their life. Now, my job as the housing secretary is to get the homes built so there are places available for people to rent they can afford, whether that's social and affordable or whether it's a private in the private rental market, to make sure that the rental market works for renters, and it hasn't. It's been unbalanced for too long. So we just passed the Renters' Rights Act, which will give renters rights over things like, unfair evictions from your home or unreasonable rent rises, including mid-year rent rises when you've already experienced one. And it's building the home so that people can meet their dream of owning a home of their own. So that's part of my job. It's obviously to do with housing, but it's also to do with rebuilding trust in a political system where people think it's stopped working for them.
We're going to talk about all of that. I'm really looking forward to talking to you about private renting in particular. Section 21 evictions. When is that ban going to come into force? When's it going to stop?
We're going to publish a roadmap on that this week, which will outline the timetable. You've got to balance the need to act as quickly as we can to support renters with the need to make sure that the sector knows what's coming so they're able to comply with it when it happens. So I had at that desk there a few days ago representatives on both sides, renters and landlords, and we're going to come up with a point when that can be implemented reasonably, but it'll be the new year.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say before Christmas might be nice for some, but nevertheless. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about numbers. So it's sort of 300,000 affordable homes, 60% of which for social rent, if that's right.
Yes.
Okay, so that means 180,000 homes with that 300,000 over 10 years, about 18,000 a year.
Yeah.
England loses more council houses than that annually through right to buy. It's about 20,000 a year, give or take. So if we're building 18,000, we're losing 20,000 a year. We're actually moving back in terms of the number that we've got, aren't we?
Well, we need to look at whatever levers we can pull to get more homes built. The 39 billion isn't the extent of it. So, we're working with developers as well. First of all, to get them building, because at the moment we're not building the numbers that we need even to meet those targets. To an extent, that's because we're still seeing the tail end of the flatlining in the housing market under the previous government. So I think it's 2023. The housing market seems to just fall off a cliff. We were getting a lot of increased costs for developers, the costs of labour, the cost of energy, the cost of materials like steel and concrete, all rocketed up. At the same time that higher energy bills was affecting households, and they just couldn't afford to build the homes in a way that made it viable for them to go on and sell them. So the housing market in London collapsed, and it stayed that way for 3 years. So we just announced a stimulus to start getting more homes built. In order to do that, one of the things I've had to adjust is the requirement for social and affordable, which was 35% of all new developments. We've had to reduce that to 20% because building the affordable homes is a cost to the developer. But if the costs on the developer are so high they're building nothing, and we had no new starts at all in a third of the London boroughs, then 35% of nothing is nothing. So we've reduced the percentage temporarily. 20% of something is worth having. It's more homes that will be available at social and affordable rents. Then as the market recovers, we can increase the proportion of affordability, so it ratchets up. And if the developers find they're able to sell the homes at higher prices than they thought they could when they were doing their calculations, we have a mechanism to claw back the additional profit that we will then plough into building more social and affordable homes. So that's a long way of saying that the amount that we're allocating, biggest amount in a generation, is not the end of our ambition. We want to get more, but I have to get the housing market moving in order to do it. And that has involved taking some decisions that I know look counterintuitive when you look at them, but given that 35% of nothing is nothing and 25% of something are homes that people can live in instead of a shop doorway, I think it's the right thing to do to get the market moving and then adjust as we move forwards.
You mentioned affordable rent there. What is an affordable rent?
Well, it's calculated as a proportion of the market rent, and I know that when the market rent is high, an affordable rent is still very high. So one of the reasons we want more social and council in the mix is that will take some people out of private rented, and then that will increase the amount of the supply of private rented, which should mean that rents would start to come down. But the housing market doesn't operate independently of the wider economy. So one of the things that we're already seeing happen under this government is that wages are rising faster than prices for the first time in over a decade. And that will eventually lead to people feeling better off, more able to afford rents. So I think some of the changes we're making will put downward pressure on rents. Others are putting upward pressure on incomes. That starts to adjust the system and make it work better for people.
Really, when I think about this, I wonder if our logic around it is perhaps a little bit backwards. That is it right that we say, okay, an affordable rent might be 80% of the market rate, that we're essentially saying this is affordable for the market, it's affordable for the housing owner, it's affordable for the landlord. Would a better way of framing affordable rent not be as a percentage of income, to think about what it is that the person that's living there is earning and what's an appropriate percentage, 30%, 40%? A lot of people pay more than 50%, right?
No, I see the point entirely. And as somebody that, rented for a large part of my life, that is how I'd have liked to have seen it. But in order to make the market work, you need a supply of housing. And if if rents are too low for it to be feasible for people to buy up properties and rent them out, you're going to get a reduction in supply, and that would cause an upward pressure on rents. So it's always a balance between those factors. I think the right way to fix the problem isn't through caps or the approach that you're describing as a proportion of incomes. It's got to be to increase supply. So again, it's back to build, baby, build. When in London, you're seeing no new homes being built anywhere, that is going to lead in a few years' time to even higher pressure on rents to go up. Not acceptable. We can't have that. It's not an immediate effect, but if we can get houses being built, flats being built, and in London, over 90% of new homes are going to be flats, increase the supply for homes that people can buy. They move out of private rented to buy their own home. That increases the number of units available to rent. Build more social and affordable housing. That reduces pressure on private rented as well. That should mean, particularly with rising incomes, that housing becomes more affordable. And I think we've got to look at what are the long-term policy approaches we can take that will stabilise the system and make it fairer into the long term, rather than do quick fixes that might have perverse outcomes like reducing supply.
Your announcement, this $7 billion for the local mayors, is that going to be accompanied by a change in devolved powers? Are they going to have the capacity to compulsory purchase land? What sits alongside it?
Well, devolution is a developing agenda, and I'm very pro devolution and always have been since I was a council leader in South London. I think very often it is the local authority, the mayoral and combined authority, that can respond better to the demands of the local area than somebody in Whitehall because they're closer to it. They understand it better. They're directly connected through democracy to what people's aspirations are for that area. So I'm interested in looking at what more we can let them do. With the $7 billion that they're getting for house building, they will be able to bid to Homes England to use the money in ways that will suit their regions. So it won't be me sitting here saying, here's the 7 billion and here's the rule book about how you're going to spend it. They will choose how they want to spend it. So, what the balance will be between council, local authority built housing or building that you're working with private developers to build with social housing as a proportion of that, housing for older people or disabled people. The population mix varies from region to region, so they may have needs that are different from each other. I think it's right that they should take their own choices.
You mentioned your time as a council leader in South London. It's slightly politically geeky, but I mean, it's my interview, so I'm going to do what I like.
Well, fair enough.
So 2006 local elections, right? Nationwide for the Labour Party, it's quite a bad election.
It was really bad. Yeah, we lost council after council after council.
But not yours.
No, we won ours by a landslide.
And for people who might not be familiar as well, you're working with Morgan McSweeney, now Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, right?
Yeah, Morgan was my campaigns organiser. He's very good at that. Then he became my Chief of Staff at Lambeth as well.
So I just wonder if, briefly, sort of lessons from that campaign, why did that happen? And perhaps also lessons that you and Morgan have drawn on since then to how you're governing in the Labour Party now.
There's good lessons on that because it was 2006. So it wasn't long after the Iraq War. Labour was very unpopular nationally. There was a scandal in the news at the time that the then Labour Home Secretary had released a lot of offenders from jail and there was an increase in offending. Labour was doing very, very badly. We had a 9% swing against Labour across London, but we won seat after seat after seat by big majorities as well and took back control of the council. We've been in opposition before. And we did it because we focused on the issues locally that were most important to the voters. Now, that doesn't sound like a blinding insight, but you would be amazed at how unusual that is sometimes.
Really?
Yeah, because politicians, it's easy for politicians to assume they know what the voters want and then tell them what the politicians are going to do. What we should be doing in a democracy is listening to what voters are concerned about and then telling them how we can help them achieve the things that they want. So it would be, some of it was housing. Even back then, that was a problem. People living in social housing, council housing, were very angry at the neglect of their estates. People were dumping rubbish there, broken windows, graffiti all over the place. They looked really, really run down. And yet the previous council wasn't doing much about it. So we were talking about council housing, fly tipping, leisure, access to swimming pools, traffic issues or transport issues are always a big issue too. But we talked about the things that we knew the voters cared about the most because we talked to tens of thousands of them to find out what their interests were. Then we showed them what the council in power at the time, the Tories and Lib Dems in coalition were doing, what we would do differently so they had a choice. And what I found, this may well be relevant to the elections that are coming up across the country next May, is if you focus on the right local issues in a local election, people will vote on them, whatever they feel about the government nationally. Now, there's an important lesson.
There is an important lesson. I mean, obviously, you can't say what the local issues in any specific given place, but to talk in slight generalities, when you think about those May elections, what do you think the issues are that are important to the electorate?
Well, again, it will be different from area to area. So you'll need the teams on the ground to be able to tell you for themselves. From where I am, I mean, we know cost of living is a big issue nationally. So council tax levels will always be one of those issues. But if you're looking at, in my area, my constituency covers 2 boroughs. The issues that people come to me about are crime, particularly on high streets. There's been an increase in drug dealing, and that fuels all sorts of other antisocial behaviour and crime. Fly tipping is always high up the list of concerns if it's not being dealt with, because if your street is covered in rubbish, it says something to you about the kind of area that you live in, and you don't want to hear that. So it's quite often very bread and butter issues like those.
Let's get back to housing. As much as I would like to indulge chat about 2006 local elections, Steve, should we abolish landlords?
Well, then you would have nowhere for people to rent, I suspect.
You know the reason I'm asking you, obviously, the Green Party have sort of made this quite central to their campaigning.
I haven't actually seen that.
Really?
You know, having met Greens, it doesn't surprise me.
Doesn't seem... Okay, tell me about that. It doesn't surprise you?
No, well, they're just a bit wacky, aren't they? They want to legalise hard drugs as well. They don't seem to believe in borders, and I think that's quite an illiberal position to have as well. So, I mean, if you abolish landlords, then where are you going to get the homes from? Or if the Greens got a magic money tree and they're just going to build all the homes out of nothing?
Let's go beyond it as a slogan and talk, I guess, about specifically private renting and what we believe private landlords bring to our sort of housing sector. Because to represent their position, I think they would say, we're not literally saying, all right, we're going to criminalise being a landlord. Yeah. What they're saying is, what does a private landlord sort of materially bring to the housing sector? They don't build the houses themselves, do they? They own them and then they rent them out. And actually, I suppose there's an economic way of viewing that is economic redistribution in the wrong direction, right? It's from a wage class who can't afford to get on the housing ladder, and it's extracting wealth from them and taking it to an asset class who do own those homes. That's probably the thrust of the argument behind the sort of slightly grabby slogan.
Well, there are reasons and times in people's lives when we want different options. I rented my home for years. There was one 15-year period when I moved every single year for 15 years. That wasn't ideal, but I had different landlords. I had flats that I didn't like. They weren't well maintained. I had really lovely flats as well. So I think somebody offering you a product that you want to pay for, in that case a flat, at a price that you are happy with, is a good thing. And I don't see why you'd want to ban that. I would like to stop exploitation where, people having to pay through the nose, people being made to pay, having already agreed a rent increase, having to pay more mid-year. But abuses like that, we're changing through the Renters' Rights Act. So I think that's the right way to do it. I think you want to landlords offering the homes that people want to live in at prices they can afford is a good thing. Gives you an option. You're not forced to go and live in one unless supply is so curtailed that there is no option anymore. But by and large, we're not at that point yet. But I want to make sure that people, even on lower incomes who tend to have less choice, also have better options in the housing market.
What about the balance, though? Let's say between looking at the housing sector more broadly. I interviewed Mick Lynch, the former General Secretary of the RMT, once, and he sort of spoke in fond terms about the sort of 1970s, where he felt the balance was more towards council housing, less towards private landlords. Still a component part of the housing sector, but not as well represented as it is now. Yeah. Do you think that balance is out of whack? Do you think we should look to recalibrate it a little?
I don't think the balance is right at the moment. No, it's one of the reasons. It's why we've got that 39 billion available to build more social and affordable homes, including the biggest increase in council housing for a generation. Because I think that element of the market has shrunk too much with all of the consequences we see. That's why temporary accommodation doubled over the last 14 years. It's why rough sleeping on the streets has doubled. It's why a lot of councils now will place homeless families in very low quality private rented, because the council housing isn't available. We do need to build. We need to build more of that. I mean, you can see another effect of this in the total amount of money we spend on housing benefit in this country is around 70-odd billion pounds. That's a huge amount of money. Of all of the homes that have been sold under right to buy since the Thatcher period, around 3/4 of them are now rented out privately, and 2/3 of those tenants are on housing benefit. So you've got a family living in the same home that used to be available at a social rent, now having to pay a higher private rent, and it's going to a private landlord, and they're subsidised through the housing benefit system. Now, as a long-term approach to housing, that doesn't make much sense. We need more social and affordable housing, both to give those individuals the security of a long-term decent and affordable home to live in, but it would also over time reduce the housing benefit bill, which is a benefit to the taxpayer, because that money could then be spent on some of the things that we want to see it spent on, like the National Health Service or education, whatever else it might be, where people would perceive a direct benefit.
And I guess the point of contestation then is, how much of that sort of social rent housing is it going to be provided by a council, or is it going to be provided by a housing association? And is it done at a democratic local level by a local authority, or is it done by a privately owned company?
Okay, well, as somebody who took over as leader of a council where the tenants were in open rebellion about the abysmal quality of service standards that they were getting from the council, having it supposedly democratically accountable does not lead always to better standards of service or carrying out functions like repair or cleaning the estate. In many cases, it was just pure neglect, and I've seen housing associations that do it much better. I've also seen councils that do the job well and housing associations that don't. So I don't think there's a particular fix that makes that work better. The thing that is in that good housing providers or good public service providers have in common is that they focus much more strongly on the needs of their customers, in this case tenants, than on the interests of the people who are working for them. So you have to focus on what is it your tenants want, not what is convenient for me as the person providing that service when I'm providing it. That seems to me the magic ingredient that makes the service work, whether it's council or housing association, or in fact many other public services.
I know that something else campaigns in this year have spoken about in terms of going further and rebalancing the power dynamic between tenant and landlord is who pays the council tax, right? Should it be paid by the owner of the property? Should it be paid by the tenant of the property? Do you have a view on whether that should be looked at and whether or not the landlord should pay it?
Council tax should be paid by the person living in the property.
Why?
It's a tax charged on the individual to fund local public services, and if the owner of the property may be living somewhere else, and they will be paying council tax where they live, I think that's reasonable. I think the point though about power is a very important one. Again, going back to the time when I was a councillor, but we had an estate in the ward where I was a councillor. It was in Brixton Hill, and it was an estate. People living there called it a sink estate. They wanted to get off it. No one wanted to live there. High levels of crime, high levels of antisocial behaviour, drug dealing, prostitution through the estate. People couldn't wait to get out of there. The tenants and leaseholders, the people who lived there, wanted to set up a resident management organisation, and they did. They then elected a board, and the managers of the estate reported to the board, not to the guys in the town hall, and over a number of years, they dramatically improved the way that the estate ran. It became cleaner. They reduced the amount of open drug dealing. There was a big concrete mall in the middle. They dug it up and planted it up as a garden, barbecue area at one end, a kids' playground at the other end, and it became a real functioning community, and people wanted to move in. So power was important. If you gave the people living on the estate, in this case it was a council estate, more power over what the managers did, they improved it. So I'm very in favour of supporting the users of public services, in this case tenants, to be able to have more power, a bigger voice to influence the way that the services they use are run. It works in social housing.
We are speaking after watching Zoran Mamdani win the mayoral election in New York City. He's foregrounded some of the issues we've been talking about today, housing. He's spoken about rent freezes, actually. I wonder if A, you've been paying attention to what's been happening over there, and B, if there are any lessons that you're drawing from that campaign.
I haven't paid a lot of attention to it because I was quite busy.
Are you really?
I've got here, but good luck to him. He's clearly infused a lot of New Yorkers, and they've come out and voted for him. I think he got slightly above 50%. I think his closest rival was another Democrat who got another 40%. So the Democrats got 90% of the vote out there. New York is its own place. I think Mamdani clearly knows the mind of New Yorkers today, and he's made a pitch and he's got their support, and good luck to him in delivering that. But we'll see over the years to come how he does.
Interesting to see a socialist governing sort of the capitalist mecca of the global economy, I think.
Yeah, well, New York's always been very unique, hasn't it? I think the interesting thing there is, will what works in New York work in the Midwest, where, the Democrats want to win back the House or the Senate or the presidency? That's where they need the votes. How do you take that energy and make it work there?